The 2024 election has actually already started. Over 50 million votes have been cast. West still have 1 week to go until the election. But these early voting numbers are looking spectacular for the Republicans. Trump is practically drowning Kamala Harris in the early vote. Now, you might look at these numbers and say Democrats are at 42, Republicans at 40. But what you also have to consider is that these independent voters that don't identify with either party in terms of their party registration, this 18% they break, more for Trump than for Harris. And comparing it to 2020, this is where we see the most significant shifts. These are the early voting numbers from 4 years ago. Democrats were at 45%, Republicans at just 30. The GOP was getting crushed in the early vote, but this time it is basically 80. This is yet another signal that Trump is indeed on track for a massive electoral college victory. And so in this video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 electoral map based on this year's early voting statistics and comparing it to what we saw. Urier Sago and so right off the bat, we're going to start off by filling in Missouri, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Alabama. These are 4 states where we simply don't have early voting data. But there's no doubt they're going to gotta Trump by solid margins, just like they have in the last 2 cycles. We're also going to fill in the remaining safe states for both candidates. These are races that simply won't be competitive. Ultimately, they're not going to too much in terms of electing the next presidents over Trump. We also have Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana, along with the North and South Dakota. We have all of Nebraska except its 2nd district, as well as Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee, Indiana, West Virginia, South Carolina, and Alaska. While Kamala Harris is going to easily carry Washington, Oregon, California, as well as Hawaii, Illinois, New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and the District of Columbia, while in Maine, the 1st district is solid blue and the 2nd solid red. And so we're now left with just the 17 most competitive races on the map. They make up less than half of the Electoral College, but they do have an overwhelming majority of the deciding power when it comes to choosing our next president. We want to start off out west in Nevada, where Democrats are in huge trouble 4 years ago. They led in the early voting. They were ahead by 4 points, Democrats at 39, Republicans at just 35. But this time things have completely changed. Did is the GOP. That is now in the lead. They're at 40%, Democrats at just 35. So it went from a Democrat +4 environment now to Republican +5. Nevada is going to be lean Republican on the map. There's no doubt Trump is going to flip the state. Democrats haven't actually made any progress in the silver states since the early Obama era, as the state has been trending right ever since in 2012 too. They elected our Republican governor, kicking the incumbent Democrat out of office in neighboring Arizona. Things don't get any better for the vice president. 4 years ago, Joe Biden was behind by just 3% in the early voting, 35% for Democrats, 38% for Republicans. And with these numbers, Biden actually won the state of Arizona by 0.3%. Becoming the first Democrat to win it since 1996, but for 2024, Republicans expanded their lead and have expanded their lead. They're now at 42. Democrats at just 35. And one other thing you have to notice that Republicans always vote more in person on Election Day. We're going to see a huge boost in GOP turnout on November 5th. And if Democrats are already behind in early voting by 7 points, it'll be impossible for them to catch up. So Arizona is also going to be lean Republican, moving on to Colorado and New Mexico. Things just keep getting worse for Kamala Harris for years ago. Democrats led by 2 this time. They lead by 3, and it might look like KLA Harris is in good shape here. But if you look at the breakdown by age, you'll quickly realize that she is actually in a lot of trouble. The 65 and over group is the most important voting in terms of age. They are always more active than younger voters, and they always break heavily in favor of the GOP. And look at the early voting numbers from 2020, 23% in Colorado were 65 and over today. That number has ballooned to 45. This is a huge advantage for Republicans, and if this trend continues, Colorado is going to become one of the most competitive races in the country. It's not even going to be likely. Harris-Biden actually won Colorado by 4 points. The vice president isn't even going to break even. It's going to be lean blue on our map in New Mexico. Things are pretty similar in 2020. Democrats were at 49% this time. They're at 49% again, and when you look at these pages, you'll notice that there are 2 graphs. You have to focus on the bar that shows the votes actually being cast, because these people that just requested a ballot, they never actually ended up voting. And so based on just the party registration, it may look like Democrats are on track to win New Mexico again. But if you break down the voting by age, you'll see that a majority of them come from the 65 or over group. This is very good news for Republicans because in 2020, the 65 or over group accounted for just 42% of the early voting electorate, so New Mexico is going to be very competitive as well. In fact, it'd tilt blue on this map down in Texas. Republicans are in a good place here as well. 4 years ago, they were at 53 cents. Today, they're at 52. And this might seem like a small drop-off, but if you compare the ages statistics, you'll see the 65 and older group area at 36 in 2020. They were at just 26. And this highlights another one of the biggest issues for Kamala Harris, one of her big strategies for winning the election, has been to court younger voters, and they simply haven't been turning out for her 4 years ago. We saw 14th cent in the 8 to 29 category today. We see just 9 younger voters break heavily in favor of Democrats. But if they're not turning out, the Democratic Party has no chance of securing this race, and so Texas is actually going to be solid in our map. Trump is going to win the Lone Star State by his largest margin ever. Before we continue, only 70% of you guys are actually subscribed, so please subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election in November. We're now going to move on to Georgia. We're going to finish up the Sun Belt before moving up to the Midwest. And so in 2020, Georgia early voting favored Republicans by 8. Today, they favor Republicans by 4. It's not too much of a change, but one other big thing you have to remember is that there's a huge difference between mail-in ballots and early inners ballots when you vote early in person. You can do that in the days and weeks leading up to Election Day. However, mail-in ballots can be mailed in up to 2 months, sometimes before November 5th, and so when you look at the numbers, you have to consider that Republicans chivalry favor voting early in person over voting by mail. And so these numbers are only going to go up for Republicans as more and more people vote early in person Election Day. Near a huge majority of the votes cast of air in Georgia come from mail-in ballots, which are going to favor Democrats exponentially more. And so in Georgia, we have more good news for Republicans. It is going to be red on our map. Now, if you want to see a big shift, just look at Florida. I mean, it is incredible what Republicans have done here. Over the last 4 years, they turned the Sunshine State from probably the most competitive in the country to one of the least if you look at the early voting. Numbers from 4 years ago, Democrats and Republicans were basically neck and neck. It was 39-38 in favor of the Dems, but today Republicans have taken a huge lead with the 5.1 million early votes already cast. It was a teal last time. This time, Republicans are at 45, Democrats at just 34 So Florida is going to be likely Republican on the map. I can't at all see Trump winning the state by a double-digit margin. Before continue, I want to tell you guys about Polymarket, the world's largest prediction market where you can track election results and instantly see who's leading. These odds react in real time to current events instead of days later like the polls. There's no bias or media spin, just pure data. Market odds reflect the collective analysis, beliefs, and of thousands of traders reacting to world events. Polymarket has also recently launched a mobile app where you can access their 2024 election forecast on the go. It's what I use every day to stay updated on the presidential race. Download it for free right now using the QR code on screen or the link in the description below. Coming back to the map now, we're going to shift our focus to North Carolina, another state where the early voting numbers have shifted from favoring Democrats to Republicans in 2020. Democrats led by 5 points. They were at 37, Republicans at just 32 today. Republicans have to totally turn things around. They actually lead now by 1% G at 34, Democrats at 33. And remember, with more and more early in-person votes being cast every day, Republicans are only going to increase their votes here. And so North Carolina is a good example of a state that's been shifting to the left, but Democrats simply haven't been able to crack the code. They've been putting hundreds of millions of dollars into winning North Carolina over the past decade, but they simply haven't been able to do it. In 2020, Joe Biden led in the early voting. Things were looking good. He was ahead in the polling average throughout the entirety of the cycle, but is still somehow lost by 1.3%. If Trump could hold the Terrell State 4 years ago, he'd definitely do it against Kamala Harris, where he's actually leading in the early voting numbers. And so North Carolina is also going to lean Republican. All 4 of the battlegrounds we've gone over so far heavily favor the GOP, finishing up the South with Virginia. In 2020, Democrats in the early votes by 8%. They lead by 14. But once again, you have to keep in mind that a lot of fairly in-person votes haven't been cast. They are going to push the Republican count up. And you also have to consider just Republicans are doing well with the 65 and over group. 45 of the ballot returns so far in the Commonwealth of Virginia came from elderly voters in 2020. This number was just 32. I mean, look at the youth vote, 6/10 for Joe Biden. now to just 8 for Harris. So Verge. Indiana is going to be another incredibly competitive state that Joe Biden won by a double-digit margin back in 2020. It is also going to be tilt blue. We're now going to move up to the Midwest, where Kamala Harris's entire campaign hangs on her ability to win Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. She cannot afford to lose even one of these 4 states. And so we're going to start off in Minnesota, where KLA Harris is ahead by 23 points in the early votes of our 4 years ago. Joe Biden led by 13. We see a huge uptick in these independent voters, and just look at their age. They're likely coming from the 65 or over group, which is very good for Donald Trump. And you also, of course, have to consider that there's a huge difference between mail-in and early-inners ballot. You can mail in a ballot on any given day, but in terms of voting early in person, there are only a few days where that is actually available. So a huge majority of these votes once again come from these mail-in ballots, which favor Democrats disproportionately, and so Minnesota is going to be lean blue. The early voting numbers here aren't terrible, but she's not going to break Joe Biden's margin. He won it by 7th. The vice president is definitely going to perform worse. Moving on down to Iowa in 2020. Democrats had a huge advantage. They led by 12 points now. This was ultimately a state that Joe Biden lost by 8 points. But in 2024 today, Democrats are in even bigger trouble. We see basically, in terms of the party registration from the early votes have been cast, it's 42 for Democrats, 39 for Republicans. With these numbers, you can totally expect Trump to win Iowa by a solid margin. It's going to be his best performance in the state. Yet the state back in 2016, he held onto it in 2020 by virtually the same margin event. How Joe Biden was supposed to be a much better candidate than Hillary Clinton. And so with the early votes basically tied, Iowa is going to be deeper than the 2nd District of Nebraska. Would on have data specific to the district, but by all accounts it's going to be lean blue. We do have numbers from Wisconsin, though, where in 2020 Democrats were at 35 cents today. They're at just 36, barely an increase. Now we see there's a much larger group of unaffiliated voters, but they break heavily in favor of Trump, so it's not really too much of an issue. And of course, we have a lot more early in person voting that's going to happen, and this is also going to favor Republicans heavily. In fact, half of the earlier ballots that have been cast already have been cast by people that are 65 or older in 20. This number was just 34, some more good news for Republicans. And I meant the bad thing for KLA Harris here is that she cannot lose Wisconsin, she cannot lose Michigan, she cannot lose Pennsylvania either. And on the first of the 3 that we've looked at, Wisconsin is currently on track to vote in favor of Trump. He won the state by 0.7 in 2016. She's probably going to be able to win it by more than 2 this time around. KLA Harris isn't looking good in Michigan. Either this is the most liberal of all 7 swing states. If she's going to win any one of these 7 battlegrounds, it's going to be Michigan. Fox News actually recently moved Michigan from the Democrat column now to being its subbed. They also recently moved Arizona out from the toss-up category to being lean Trump. And so all across the map, the former president is making gains. Michigan is no exception in 2020. Democrats were behind by 2 points with the early ballots that were returned today. Democrats lead by just 7 points, so a smaller margin than even what we saw in Wisconsin by age 53 cent are 65 and older, just 8 cent come from. Younger voters, looking at the numbers from 2021, 33 cent were from the 18 to 29 demographic. And so Michigan is a state that Kel Harris simply cannot lose. If Michigan goes, she's going to lose the election in a modern-day landslide with Trump, picking up every single swing state and potentially even more. You look at these graphs and you see maybe in some of the swing states, the Democrats are slightly ahead, but this is not where they need to be. And they know that is why they are panicking. Michigan is going to lean Republican gin. Ohio, the early voting numbers have been pretty similar here in 2020. It was 48 to 38 in favor of the Republicans today. It's 49 to 42 once again. In favor of the Republicans, only 2 million votes have already been cast in the Buckeye state. It's a state that always votes very similarly to Iowa, another state where numbers for the GOP are pretty good. However, Iowa does lean slightly more than its other Midwestern neighbor, and so Ohio is to be placed into the likely red category. I definitely see Trump winning by B. Margin share, but it's not going to go as far for him as Iowa. And now to finish off Midwest, we have Pennsylvania. This is the big one. Pennsylvania is very important to both campaigns, so it also makes winning the election much easier for Trump, because if he wins Pennsylvania, all he'll need is North Carolina and Georgia. Along with it, he won't need Michigan, he won't need Wisconsin, nor will he need Nevada or Arizona. And so in Pennsylvania, we see some pretty promising early voting numbers for the GOP in 2020. It was 65 Democrat, 24% Republican, too. It's only 59 Democrat, 31% Republican. The GOP's in very good spot here. West still have an entire week of early in-person voting left. There's really conceivably now the Kay Harris is going to win the Keystone States. He should have chosen Josh Shapiro to be her running mate. That would have been the smarter choice. I mean, Tim Walz was a complete flop in debate against J.D. Vance. It's a Pennsylvania is also going to be lean red. This means that all 7 of the battlegrounds currently clearly favor the Republican nominee. We're now going to finish off the map up in the Northeast with New Hampshire and Maine. Looking at the 2020 numbers in the Granite State, we saw Democrats at 50%, Republicans at just 21. Republicans were outnumbered more than 2-1 4 years ago. But today, Democrats are at just 39, Republicans at 33. It is virtually in New Hampshire is a state that Trump realistically can win. I mean, in 2016, he came within half a percentage point of defeating Clinton. And so today, the state of New Hampshire is once again going to be till blue. Democrats are still favored, but they definitely are cutting it close in Maine, though we don't see that dramatic of a difference. But Republicans have improved here as well in 2020. Democrats outnumber Republicans 2-1, exactly 48-24 today. Thought they are ahead by just 17 points. Republicans gained. They're now 27. Democrats have fallen to just 44. And so Maine is going to lean for Kamala Harris. And so, with the 2024 election well underway, over a quarter of the expected vote has already been cast. Democrats at 42, Republicans at just 40. This is very good news for Republicans, since in 2020, these early voting numbers favored Biden by 15 and cent. Now, in 2020, there was a huge discrepancy in terms of Democrats and Republicans voting early and in person. And this is what the 2024 electoral map would look like if those trends held true. However, I do expect those trends to subside slightly. Is more Republicans voting early, more Democrats voting on Election Day, at least proportionally. And so this means that the GOP isn't going to get as much of a boost as they would have from Election Day voting. And so we're going to make some slight changes to this map here. Kamala Harris is going to perform slightly better in states like Colorado and New Mexico. It could also move Virginia and New Hampshire into the lean blue columns, while Iowa and Texas are going to be likely red, and potentially Michigan and Nevada get slightly more competitive as well. But still, we're not going to see any major flips. These early voting numbers remain very good for Donald Trump. He's no doubt on track to win 312 electoral votes, is the general consensus right now. He's on track to carry every single swing state. Thank you. That wraps up our coverage. Remember, the news never stops, and neither do we. Stay tuned to HBF News for continuous updates. Take care.